There are few video game series that have lasted 30 years, had consistent new releases spanning 3 decades, let alone stayed relevant during that time period. Final Fantasy has done it, Super Mario Bros. Has done it, and as of today, Fire Emblem can be counted among those elite few.
Among the myriad of tactical role-playing series that have come up between the genre's building blocks of the 1980s and the present, only Fire Emblem has managed to remain relevant since the release of Onkonkoryu Tohikari no Tsurugi on April 20th, 1990. It might not have been the first tactical RPG ever made, but the Famicom original is considered the grandfather of the genre for a good reason. Its success, and the success of future entries, would forever cement the concepts conceived by Shozo Kaga, Gunpei Yokoi, and the team over at Intelligent Systems, with said sequels further iterating on the original's marriage of character-based storytelling with strategic gameplay. Its most recent release, Fire Emblem Three Houses, being so radical and overhaul in terms of direction and setting that made for a remarkable, if messy, return to home consoles is a testament to the ever-changing nature of the series that has allowed it to persist throughout the decades, making for some phenomenal games along the way. However, Fire Emblem's place in gaming hasn't always been so golden. While it is arguably at heights never before seen in series history, with a slew of successful spin-offs and sequels, said history saw its fate nearly sealed away a mere 8 years ago when its future hinged on awakening success, itself a byproduct of a string of disappointing releases on consoles seeing phenomenal success like the DS and Wii, which consequentially saw it say farewell to home consoles for over a decade and, for the first time since they were localized, a Fire Emblem game to skip an international release. Which is not to say that this form of recession is unprecedented, be it for Fire Emblem or more prominent series. Despite my earlier proclamations, the history of dynasties is rarely one triumph after another, for there was yet another time when Fire Emblem's future on the big screen, well, bigger than handheld screen, seemed uncertain.
It wasn't necessarily a dark time since new games in the series were coming out, all of which were great. However, it had been a long time since the series had come to the living room as opposed to with you in your car, to say nothing of its adversity towards embracing the third dimension, which, at long last, brings us to Fire Emblem Path of Radiance.
The story of Path of Radiance is as long as it is fascinating, beginning not with the Game Boy Advance duology that preceded it, but with the last living room release, Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Released on the Super Famicom, the game would go on to be known as one of the most difficult entries in the series, and despite being among the series' highest highs in terms of gameplay, sold incredibly poorly, owed in part to a very unusual distribution method for the actual game, and an equally baffling release date. While it was technically the best-selling game on the console of that year, being the best-selling Super Famicom title of 1999 is like saying the best-selling Beanie Baby of the 2010s. It's no longer the new hotness. Kids these days are into horribly aged polygonal graphics. Why didn't they release it on the N64? Well, Thracia 776 was never supposed to have taken as long as it did to develop, and Intelligent Systems were working on a Fire Emblem game for the N64, but that one was unceremoniously cancelled, with most of the ideas from its conceptual stage being heavily reworked into Fue no Tsurugi. In any case, the failed flight of Fire Emblem 64 and Thracia 776's terrible sales was a 1-2 punch that left the series relegated to handhelds for the foreseeable future due to the ever-increasing cost of console development. However, Intelligent Systems had planned to return to the TV once they would be able to secure the budget necessary for a new Fire Emblem game on Nintendo's latest home console. Per Hitoshi Yamagami, co-producer of Path of Radiance, after the Gamecube was launched, development costs rose steeply, and the kind of budget needed to present the player with these kind of grand worlds became harder to obtain. It was then when the decision was made to move the series to the GBA that Nahiro-san told me, "I want the series to return to the TV screen once more. Let's make it our 5-year objective." In order to achieve our goal, the decision was made to create content that could sell worldwide. We thought that doing this would help us eventually return to home consoles. Their big break came when the second of these handheld experiences, Rekka no Ken, became the first entry in Fire Emblem's history to release across the globe and received critical acclaim and commercial success worldwide, giving Intelligent Systems the chance to once more bring Fire Emblem to home consoles. As Path of Radiance would end up bringing the series to the third dimension, naturally there were a lot of ambitious ideas that never quite made their way into the final title. One of the more interesting was making the base where you'd arm your characters and have them converse with one another fully explorable with facilities like the arena or a new notion called the auction house, similar to the My Castle feature that would end up in Fates, or Garrick Mott's multitude of facilities found in Three Houses. Story-wise, the original scope would have made Ike the latest progenitor protagonist, yet another son of a noble.
Oh, did I say Ike? Because there was a point in development where his name was originally going to be Paris, as in the Japanese name for Priam, the character from Awakening, who claims to be Ike's descendant. Yeah, this isn't the first time that Fire Emblem has done this. Roy, for example, was originally going to be known as Ike. I know that game developers will recycle concepts that were unused from a previous game, but still, does Intelligent Systems have, like, a requirement to use anything they've ever considered? Is it going to turn out that Edelgard was going to be known as Deirdre, who's going to be known as Seda?
It's honestly absurd how dedicated they are to using every name that they're even remotely fond of. Like, Soren was originally going to be called Lion, as in Eric and Ephraim's friend from the Sacred Stones. Even from their cancelled games, they ended up using the name Ephraim when a character from Final Fantasy 62. I'm getting way off topic. Anyway, Ike was going to be a lord born the son of a duchy who was charged with treason and murdered during an assault into their territory, leaving Ike to uncover the mystery as to the fall of his family and his father's death, all while undergoing training at a mercenary company founded by former retainers of his father who managed to survive the onslaught brought about by that treacherous day. Elements of this premise were adopted or adapted into the finished game, most notably the mercenary company that Ike would train under, and a mystery of his father's former life that led to his demise demanding a deduction of his ci devant deeds, but many of the more novel ideas were abandoned in favor of a vision focused more on characterization and camaraderie. A base was introduced for where characters could interact with one another outside of the battlefield, even having the normally battle-worn supports brought to life in this space rather than some sprawling front lines. The one thing that remained consistent across all drafts was the game focusing on racism. The politics of Tellius' countries were always informed by the underlying tension between the various people that occupied each nation. In the middle of March 2004, Nintendo's Japanese site teased that a new Fire Emblem game was going to be unveiled in April of that year, and the May issue of Shonen Jump that came out in April, the announcement was official. Fire Emblem was coming back to home consoles for the first time since the 90s, and making its way down the same path that Metroid had on the Gamecube, under the name Fire Emblem Swin no Kozeki. Now, Path of Radiance's production ended up running parallel to another title that Intelligent Systems was working on. During June of that same year, another Fire Emblem game was announced via Famitsu, this one being for the Game Boy Advance. Dubbed Swin no Kozeki, it would go on to be known as Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Both games were set for a 2004 release date, but while the Sacred Stones would see the light of day during winter 2004 in Japan, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance would end up being delayed, ultimately being released on the series' 15th anniversary, though both games would eventually be released elsewhere in 2005, with Path of Radiance reaching North America on October 17th, 2005. Unlike the relatively untouched Sacred Stones, the localization of Path of Radiance in North America was more involved, quite literally. The localization team over at Treehouse would frequently consult with Intelligent Systems so as to preserve the meaning behind its storyline while transforming aspects of its script which might clash with said content and its culture. According to then associate producers Tim O'Leary and Rich Amtower, when we talk to the development team, we're getting the motivations and the original intent behind the meanings of the names, and we try to convey that same spirit in English. We have followed it on the boards and other places, so we are sensitive to the issue. It's a bit of a hot button topic. We always do this with the permission of the development team, to make sure we are still true to the game's origins. A good example of this is one of the characters' names in the Japanese version was Ulysses. That immediately brings connotations to the famous Civil War general Ulysses S. Grant, or the Roman name for the hero of Homer's Odyssey. So we went back and spoke with the development team regarding the origins and meaning of the name to them, so we could keep that feeling that Intelligent Systems had when giving that character that specific name.
The character originally named Ulysses? Bastion. Yeah, you can see why they decided to change that along with other alterations made to better bring about the character's mannerisms. I'd say it worked out pretty well at least.
Not that all tweaks were related to the writing, a good amount of them were fixing bugs found in the Japanese version. The most notable change was the addition of an easy mode and the omission of Maniac mode. Think of it as a test run for the obscene difficulty levels that later games would grant, like Shadow Dragon's 5-star hard mode. Upon release, Path of Radiance received rapturous praise and reviews on par with the first localized entry. If games like Advance Wars and Ogre Battle are your cup of tea, do yourself a favor and play this game. If you haven't tried your hand at strategy RPGs, it's the perfect time to give Fire Emblem a chance. Embrace the drought. Sales figures are less clear, though according to Yamagami, it sold well enough to justify a sequel. In the period when Path of Radiance was released, you could see that the Gamecube was already on its deathbed. Even so, we still managed to sell hardware with it. In other words, it became even clearer that the series had the power to boost hardware sales. In recent years, Path of Radiance has become one of the more beloved entries in the series, and one of the most sought after titles on the Purple Lunchbox, to say nothing of the fervor surrounding its protagonist. To this date, it remains the only game in the series to get a full-on, direct sequel, as in, no remake with a new campaign attached to it, or standalone remake of the consecutive chapters. Although I guess Radiant Dawn did carry over the support from Path of Radiance, but it's not the same thing.
I've been pretty clear about not liking Radiant Dawn, and part of the reason for that, aside from some truly baffling design and narrative choices, is because of how much I enjoyed Path of Radiance, both for its gameplay and story. Also, Radiant Dawn screwed up the difficulty mode. I do not understand how they did that for the two Tellius titles.
However, it's been a long time since I've played it, and my opinions on other entries in the series have drastically changed over the years thanks to beating them multiple times. As an example, I've really grown to loathe how tedious trudging through the maps in Seasonal Cable can be, namely since I tend to play Fire Emblem on original hardware, and while Awakening still holds a very special place in my heart, its map design really falls apart when the VOM campaign commences. So, how does this particular entry hold up after my latest playthrough? Let's celebrate the series' Big 3-0 with an extensive dive into Fire Emblem Path of Radiance.
Well, Ike, you had enough?
The story opens with Ike in the midst of training with his father Grail as the newest addition of the Grail mercenaries, putting him through the ropes as he gets to learn the usual routine that's expected of mercantile employment. Things escalate quickly as war breaks out between their homeland of Crimea and the invading Dane forces, culminating with the GM's hand being forced when they rescue a woman who claims to be Princess Zalencia, heir to the Crimean throne and unknown to the public, that winds up employing them as she seeks asylum in the neighboring nation of Gallia, a Laguz nation allied with Crimea who may be Dane's next target. Unfortunately for Grail, he never finds out if that's the case, as he's murdered by the Black Knight, a sable-clad character with a connection to the mercenaries' past, who's searching for a medallion. In his passing, Ike is forced to take up leadership of the Grail mercenaries far sooner than expected, eventually bringing Alencia over to the country of Benyon to raise an army and liberate their homeland from the tyrannical King Ashnard, all the while preparing himself for a fight to avenge his fallen father at the hands of his killer. The plot itself is, on the surface, fairly standard for Fire Emblem, save for one major difference we'll discuss momentarily. But the characters that comprise the Grail mercenaries, at its inceptions anyway, are anything but that. They're not your stereotypical sellswords. As a unit, they can be rather chaotic. They bicker and constantly tease each other in a way that makes them seem more like their siblings than co-workers. Which makes sense given that some of them actually are siblings. Even when they fight amongst people they're not related to, Ike and Boyd contesting who's the better warrior, Mist constantly having to break things up, there's a hint of affection behind their jabs that only the closest of companions could convey without it seeming mean-spirited. Which is not to say that any of the new additions don't fit right in. The likes of Kieran, Jill, and Jeffrey have such great chemistry with Oscar and Mist among other recruits new and old. The camaraderie on display is aided wonderfully by the addition of base conversations, which we'll get to momentarily. It makes for the most fleshed out setting the series would conceive until Garreg Mach almost 15 years later, which is a testament to how excellent the writing is that it's held up so well for all of these side characters. And then there's Ike. What a great lead the Lordless Lad makes. There is a good reason why people remember him so fondly out of the many, many excellent characters in this game. They are a textbook example of how to do a fish out of water archetype while also doing a revenge story in a way that's actually compelling. From the literal opening of the game, they establish just how inexperienced Ike is as a trainee, swinging away at his father with reckless abandon only for his attack to miss and be knocked out for his attempt. This is reinforced in Chapter 2, where he rushes in to save Rolf and his sister from the vengeful bandits that kidnap them despite being told to wait. And he does so not knowing where he was supposed to go in the first place. Had it not been for Shinnen, him defying Titania's orders could have gotten somebody killed. He might fight for his friends, but the fight might just end up with one of them dying if he keeps that up. There's a plethora of moments like that in the early hours, and plenty more throughout Path of Radiance that hammer home how little Ike knows if he's going to successfully lead the Grail mercenaries. And while Ike does eventually get there, the journey for him is as long and arduous as it is a delight for us to bear witness to. For me, the moment that defines Ike isn't his speech to the Crimean army as the war draws to a close, or him chewing out Soniki or the Benyon nobility for humiliating Alencia as if this is some childish game. It's this singular boss fight. This is perfect. Mages in the world of Tellius are nothing out of the ordinary, you'll get plenty of them in your ranks, but to Ike, seeing another mage is something worthy of surprise, because to Ike, he's never seen another mage besides Soren. This moment lasts less than 5 seconds, but it does such an amazing job of conveying Ike's character in a nutshell. He might one day be the equal of Grail, he has a ton of potential, but he sure isn't on par right now with the level of knowledge that he's displaying. Speaking of Grail, his death is handled magnificently. It's one of the best sequences in the entire game, remaining a real tearjerker to this day. Ike painfully taking his father over his shoulders, rushing to bring him back to the fort that they're staying at in the vain hope that they can be saved. The rain pouring down, reflecting the turmoil and uncertainty that follows Ike's father passing away so soon, as Ike keeps telling himself, closer and closer as he gets to the base, that it's gonna be alright. But it won't be alright. The fallout, as the characters reflect on the home that Grail gave them, and all the good that's come from their time in the company under his leadership, as they've essentially made themselves a new family, hits like a truck. Mist in particular seems devastated by her father's death right up until she gets to take a swing at his murderer. You completely understand why she's so opposed to Ike doing anything that might take him away from her. But not all of said family members grieve for long. Gatry and Shinin flat out refuse to be led by Ike as the new commander and leave. Yes, Gatry's abandonment doesn't last long, and there could have been greater gameplay consequences like the departure resulting in a huge loss of gold, all the characters' biorhythms being at their worst point, but that undermines how effective their defection ends up being, narratively speaking, in reinforcing how much of an uphill battle Ike is in for.
It's like when people say that Ike being the son of such an important and skilled warrior like Grail undermines what they're going for. They're not necessarily wrong per se, on paper I'd agree, however it's the execution that makes it work.
It would have been really easy to have a chapter where Shinin embraces his inner Starscream and declares that he's the new leader, while Ike proves himself worthy of their respect and defers to their command, but they don't, certainly not right away. Shinin curses out a bunch over Ike becoming the new commander, his earlier conversations displaying the contempt that he has for Ike getting so much authority as of late, when he has, on 2 separate occasions, disobeyed the command of his superior, and he ends up leaving the party until well after Ike is in the midst of invading Dayan. In fact, he only ends up rejoining you if Rolf talks to him before dueling against Ike. And even then, he still belittles Ike at every moment that he can, be it in a sober state or demonstrably drunk, despite Ike having beaten him fair and square on 2 separate occasions.
It's moments like these where Path of Radiance shines the brightest, when it's marrying its story and gameplay together to show how much a character has grown. It's truly special how they managed to make this moment out of Shinin's clear disgust at this upstart son of a mercenary. They also do a fantastic job of painting Shinin as a complete jackass, but that's unrelated.
This is also why, in Radiant Dawn, the Black Knight revealing that he let Ike win irritates me so much. Sure, he had a sword blessed by the goddess, but so did the Black Knight. The deciding factor was Ike's abilities and everything he had learned up to that point, the Black Knight himself being a test to see if he was finally living up to his potential. And he passed. Or he didn't, the teacher just graded him on a bell curve and they can have an incredibly lame follow-up fight while trying to humanize the guy who talked about doing terrible things to a little girl in front of said girl's father. That works. Sorry, I misread that. I meant to say that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. I'll talk about the problems pertaining to that game when we get to Radiant Dawn, but while I've attempted to keep my praise and criticisms within the context of Path of Radiance alone, it does need to be acknowledged that if you have played the sequel, it does lessen the impact of certain character moments in this title when you know about some of the retcons that they'd make in Radiant Dawn, not to mention the continuity errors. But we're not here to talk about the endgame of that game, not unless it's to highlight how great the journey is to getting to that final confrontation between Ike and his father's killer in Path of Radiance. It's some of the most compelling means of portraying character growth by interweaving with the gameplay in the series' history. The first non-cutscene encounter is in Chapter 10, where the Black Knight will unexpectedly appear if the player's taking too long to clear the map. He can kill Ike with a single blow should he get within range, with the Black Knight chastising him for thinking someone who took down such a legendary warrior like Grail would be defeated so easily. This moment is small, but it serves to paint the Black Knight as this force of nature, nigh unstoppable by anything that crosses their blade, and widening the currently grand gap in skill between the two sword fighters. Much later on, the Black Knight will appear during a defensive mission, and Ike can survive a hit should the two come to blows, but he still won't be able to harm them without using the blade that was tossed to his father, one blessed by the goddess called Ragnell. And he didn't bring it with him. It's a great way to show both the characters' growth while also emphasizing their naivete and how Ike still has a long way to go. Unfortunately, the next part of this journey is slightly undercut by the pacing in the last few chapters. The game's story more or less rushes to a conclusion once Ike has seized the Dayan capital, including the part getting to the rematch between Ike and the Black Knight by revealing Ike has been holding on to Ragnall this entire time. He's just never bothered to use it up until this fight. Why Ike never thought to use such a powerful weapon in permanent battles comes across as more contrived than anything else, and from a narrative perspective, a missed opportunity. At this point, it was fairly common for Fire Emblem protagonists to earn their legendary weapons in some capacity. These were often done to test the protagonist, be it their intelligence, their strength, convictions, or a combination of the three. While failing to follow tradition is in and of itself no flaw, the fact that this encounter comes so soon after the last battle between Ike and the Black Knight, it adds to how rushed the final few chapters feel. There really should have been another chapter where Ike retrieves the weapon and perhaps reflects on whether or not he's ready to finally face the Black Knight. The most we get is the conversation between him and Titania. As it stands, him just having it with him the entire time is contrived, and it completely squanders an opportunity to explore this turmoil. Specifically for an entry that places so much of its story's weight on whether its protagonist is truly up to the task of avenging his father. That said, the encounter with the Black Knight is paid off with substantial dividends. From a gameplay perspective, they make for an incredibly difficult fight, with how dangerous their Luna skill is and how easily Ike is worn down from a single hit compared to the Black Knight, who is fairly durable and quick to recover. But when you finally put him down for the count, the catharsis is simply palpable.
While there are minor greats to be had, they don't make Ike anything less than an amazing protagonist, one of the best in the entire series. Which, unfortunately, stands in contrast to the thin, two-dimensional characterization that's given to most of the villains. Isn't he adorable? I fight for my friends!